Well, welcome. I am April Chatham Carpenter. I'm the department chair of the Department of Applied Communication at UA Little Rock, and we're so excited to have you here tonight. I had to count up the number of leadership lectures that we have had, and this is our eighth year to be doing leadership lectures, eighth annual leadership lecture series. And tonight, we are very excited to have a couple of our faculty actually presenting tonight. And usually these leadership lectures are made up of either a faculty presenter or alumni presenter. And tonight we have Doctors Julien Mirivel and Avinash Thombre that are going to speak tonight about their research on transformation with Heifer International. I'm going to introduce them first, then talk just briefly about kind of a preview of what they're going to talk about, and then I'll let them get into their presentation. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. So hold those questions, or if you want to put some of them in the chat while they are talking, you can. And Bailey and I are going to be kind of curating questions that might be coming in through the chat, but also we'll have an opportunity for people to raise their hands when they get finished with their presentation. So Julien and Avinash, who I call them as that name, but if you want to call them Dr. Mirivel and Dr. Thombre, respectively, you can. They are both professors of applied communication at UA Little Rock, and Dr. Mirivel, or Julien, is the author of several books on positive communication. You might be familiar with The Art of Positive Communication is one that talks about interpersonal relationships. Then he also has How Communication Scholars Think and Act from a Lifespan Perspective. And then most recently just came out with Positive Communication for Leaders, Proven Strategies for Inspiring Unity and Affecting Change. So you might check that book out. Dr. Mirivel is also the founder of the Positive Communication Network. And if you want to know more about that, I'm sure he would be happy to share that information with you of how you can be a part of that network. Dr. Thombre, or who I call Avinash, his research concerns issues of diversity, of hybrid identity, personal transformation, and social change, facilitating social change using positive communication strategies. He's also the author of a couple of books, both on intercultural communication and communication across boundaries, looking at the Indian, being from India, the Indian way on that. Tonight's lecture is going to be focusing on an interdisciplinary project that Avinash and Julien have been a part of, along with a couple of other faculty members here at UA Little Rock that are not part of the Department of Applied Communication. And they're going to share the story of this interdisciplinary project that began in 2019 in Nepal, and it spanned over 4 countries across 3 continents. And by the time that they are finished tonight, we hope that you're going to see some specific ways that we as human beings can harness our communicative power to create real change in our lives and in the life of our community. They're going to do this based on research on hundreds of interviews and thousands of survey responses to be able to demonstrate that. So welcome, Julien and Avinash, to the Applied Communication Fall Leadership Lecture. And I think, Julien, you're going to start us off.
That's correct. Well, so thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really are thrilled. And we're going to go right into the story here. So in 2019, I received an unusual call from Heifer International, and there's a backstory, and I'll share it another day. And they wanted to send me to Nepal to go on the ground and really explore how men and women, just like you see in the picture in front of you, were somehow personally transformed by the work that Heifer International does. Their mission is to end poverty around the world in a sustainable way. And so right away, as a response to that, I formed an interdisciplinary research team with Avinash Thombre, Tusti Tenbenzo, as well as Kirk Leach, who is now at Old Dominion University. And we embarked on a journey. And it did begin in Nepal. So that summer, Dr. Avinash Thombre and I flew to Kathmandu, Nepal. And this was some of the views that you might see if you were going to Kathmandu. This is one of my favorites. This is a view of Mount Everest, in the Himalayas. And then, of course, we landed in Kathmandu itself. This is kind of the view you would see if you were flying down, arriving into the high hills of Kathmandu. And so Avinash and I found ourselves in Nepal, and the whole purpose of the experience was really to go meet, interact and learn about what Heifer was doing on the ground. So thank you, April, for the introduction. For those of you who didn't catch it, I'm Dr. Julien Mirivel, and with me is Dr. Avinash Thombre. And Avinash is going to take it up for just a moment and tell you what we tried to do in Nepal on our first expedition of sorts. So Avinash, tell them what happened next.
Thank you, Julien. So as you can see, when we landed in Kathmandu, and then we were there for about 10 days, visiting different communities that Heifer was doing work with. And Julien and me, as you see in this picture here, with all the women and different work that has been going on there, Julien and me both were mesmerized of what we saw there. We were almost amazed of the work that was going on there. We met 3 women. I particularly remember that their names, Goma, Sita, and Rama. These 3 women were part of the first self-help group that Heifer had formed back in 1993 that received goats and cornerstone training, and then they formed their own self-help groups. So these 3 women were basically in abject poverty. They were living a very dismal life. But now we saw them, when we were interacting with them, we saw them living a good life. So what stuck to me in particular was that not only they were living a good economic life, but something remarkable beyond that, which is self-transformation that had happened in their lives. They had made much progress in their self-identity. Their communication skills were remarkable. Actually, one of them was able to speak fluently English with a rich vocabulary. Remember, she was uneducated when she started in her first program. So there was a remarkable change that happened in many spheres. So we witnessed women who were involved in civic affairs of their village. They even started their own cooperatives and doing these amazing things. So Julien and me then came back to Little Rock, and we formed a team along with Dr. Kirk Leach and Dr. Tutsi Bensel. We tried to understand what was going on there, what we saw in Nepal and other places that Heifer was trying us to go to. So our guiding questions for the whole study, this multi-study, multi-site global study, was how do Heifer beneficiaries create deep personal change in their lives? Can we map those changes? And then can we see how do they become leaders in their own lives? And then how can we create this personal revolution based on what they're doing in our own lives? So these are our guiding questions that we have.
So we used these questions, and as Avinash was saying, really we were just so impressed by the transformation that was happening on the ground. And the reason why Heifer brought us is because they wanted to develop a way of measuring the transformation that was taking place. They knew they had stories around the world of men and women who had been transformed, but they wanted an empirical measure to document that change across countries, across continents, to see if that would be doable. And that's really been our task. So what we've done, just a brief overview, is we have developed a interview survey, as well as an interview schedule, as well as a survey that we've used now in 3 different pilot projects. We started in Nepal, but that was really kind of informational. Then we did a project in Bihar, India, one of the most really poor areas in India. Approximately 66% of the population is illiterate. And in Bihar, India, we conducted 800 surveys spanning approximately 3 years of community development, as well as 100 in-depth interviews with women, because in India, all of the self-help groups are women. And most of these interviews lasted between 60 and 90 minutes, depending on the person. And really, with the survey, we developed 100 questions that we use almost every time. And with the interview schedule, the in-depth interviews, we have approximately 30 to 40 questions that are really designed to explore this idea of transformation. So we went to Bihar, India, the first pilot study. In 2022, we collected data in Uganda. This picture really illustrates what you might see if you were traveling to Uganda in one of the villages that we are, in which we're collecting data with participants. And then in 2023, in March, we were able to collect data in Honduras. This is a picture taken from Heifer International with men, as you can see here. So in Honduras, the self-help groups are constituted by both men and women. And you may notice that all of the men are holding hands, which in Honduras would be a big deal because they're trying to confront the macho culture that is dominant, especially among farmers in the hills of Honduras. So part of what we're drawing on now is over 2,400 surveys, 300 interviews conducted with people all around the world. But what we're going to focus on is what we're learning very practically. So we could tell you the results of the data, but what we wanted to do is, what are we learning from this research that could inform how you might transform yourself? And it turns out that we believe, based upon this research that we've been doing, that you can create the same kind of internal revolution, this personal transformation that we have seen happening in Nepal and India and really around the world in your own life by practicing 7 core elements. Avinash is going to introduce these 7 core elements, and then we're going to choose 4 of them to really explore today together.
So, right. When we came back from Nepal, we sat down as a research team and we brainstormed, and we were reading a lot of literature about personal transformation, how it happens in different disciplines. So Dr. Tutsi Bensel is from criminal justice, so she had some ideas. And then Dr. Kirk Leach, he was from, his main focus is empowerment and civic engagement. And we put together our heads and came up with this model which is kind of a roadmap for transformation. So there are 7 elements in this transformation model, and they are drawn from the existing literature in the field of communication, social change, empowerment, leadership, and civic engagement. So the first element that you see here on the top is the self-identity. So we believe that when transformation happens, there is a change in self-identity of a person. Well, actually, if you look at self-identity, it is an accumulation of meanings that represents the uniqueness of who a person actually is. So it is actually divided into 2 parts. It has 2 components, self-efficacy and self-esteem. So self-efficacy can be understood as one's ability to complete a task well, focus on capacities and competencies that we have. Overall, I think self-identity is an important because it can impact the choices that we make. It can affect our actionable behaviors, and then a level of effort that we extend to perform a particular task. So self-identity is the first element. The second one actually is perception of others. So when we say, do we trust this person or do we mistrust this person? What is our attitude toward our neighbors, our family members, our friends, our larger network? What kind of perception do we have? Are we connected to them formally or informally? And how these perceptions help us to challenge and reinforce our ideas, values, beliefs when we actually interact with these people. So the perception of others is really a core element which undergoes change when people transform. The third element that we have come up with is communication competency. It is a person's ability to communicate more effectively across different contexts, in different encounters, in interpersonal encounters, small groups, also public speaking. So communication competency undergoes a shift, undergoes a change when a person transforms. So in addition to focusing on development of these behaviors, we also expect participants to develop a stronger sense of assertiveness. These are communication abilities, expressiveness, supportiveness, and displaying immediacy behaviors. So that's the third element. The fourth element is state of leadership. Is basically defined as a personal change towards a state of purpose. It is a focus on others. It is something to do with an interest, everlasting interest in learning and integrity. This is a movement in which participants incrementally develop a fundamental state of leadership and is composed of personal efforts to lift our own thoughts, feelings, actions, and outcomes, and in turn, those of others whom we are trying to lead. So state of leadership is the fourth element. The fifth one, which is intercultural sensitivity, is one of the big elements here. It composes of participants' ability to welcoming difference. It is a movement from being emphatic to others and also remarkable openness, displaying remarkable openness to differences that we have among each other. It focuses on ways in which people experience, interpret, and interact across different cultures and different differences that we have. It is a developmental continuum along which individuals progress towards a deeper understanding and appreciation of cultural variance, as well as displaying greater social facility and negotiating cross-cultural dissimilarity. So there's a lot going on at intercultural sensitivity. The sixth element that we have is empowerment. So when people undergo Heifer training, they display empowerment. Empowerment is basically a concept that includes psychological and educational, as well as social empowerment. So particularly, a lot of participants in the Heifer projects are women. So we focused on women development and Heifer's value-based holistic community development. We took a lot of elements from there. And so it revolves around some active multidimensional processes which enable women to realize their full identity and powers in all spheres of life. The last element there is civic and community engagement. It's a process of displaying or taking action in different ways that will benefit not only individuals, but also our groups and community that we live in. Civic and community engagement basically reflects an individual's duty to embrace responsibilities of citizenship with an obligation to actively participate, not only alone, but in collaboration with others, engage in volunteers service activities for the enhancement of community issues and strengthen the local community. So it is an element which displays creative, positive change in the community. So these were the 7 elements that we that form our model of personal growth, and we have survey items, as well as interview questions to measure these. So Julien will tell the next.
So what we're going to do next, thank you, Avinash, for a great introduction to the model itself that has shaped a lot of our mythological approach. But what we want to show you today is that, and we found evidence for each of them in very important ways, but what we wanted to do is kind of tap into how can you draw on this idea, this model, and begin maybe to create change in your own personal life. And so we're going to start with this idea of identity. You know, Avinash defined it just a few minutes ago, and he said self-identity, if we were to define it, is the accumulation of meanings that represent the uniqueness of who you are. It's the way you look at yourself. And, you know, the way we look at ourselves obviously shapes what we do, the actions we take every day, the risk, the challenge we take on, as well as the ideas and our willingness to meet other people. When we look at the research that we've done, Avinash described that we've tried to measure 2 things, particularly in the survey. One of them was connected to this idea of self-worth, which is really self-esteem, and the way in which we may feel valued or not valued, or worthy or not worthy. And then we looked at self-efficacy, which is really the feeling you get of competency and whether or not you believe that you have the capacity to confront challenges, obstacles, or the idea even that if you work on something, it's somehow going to come to fruition. And that was really important in our work. And what we noticed across all sites, whether we went to India, Uganda, or Honduras, is that self-esteem really didn't move across time periods, but self-efficacy did. It was people's development and understanding that they have agency in their own lives, that they can take their lives in their own hands and begin to make change. That really was the kind of ignition for the positive change that we saw happening in our lives. If you asked a woman in Bihar at 0 months at baseline, what are you doing in the next 6 months? They would tell you, what are you talking about? I have nothing to do here. I'm worried about what I'm going to eat tonight. But if you ask that same person at 3 years, she would tell you, I'm working on this. I'm working hard. I'm developing a business. I'm working with my group to accomplish this goal. They developed their efficacy. Here's some examples from the data that I put together. The facilitator is asking a question here. This is from Honduras. The informant is saying, well, what am I going to do? Not to stop working, because success depends on oneself. We have to look at things from a positive perspective. And if we have a dream, we have to try to fight to achieve that dream. Notice how much agency is built into this quote, right? Another from India said, I want to expand my business, and I am planning to have 10 adult goats. And if they mate and give me 2 kids each, I will have 20 goats in total, and I will earn around 15,000 rupees to 20,000 rupees of profit from them. So this is how I am going to execute my plan. Notice the language here about goal setting. Goals, a person in India said, are much more important to me now than they used to. Just by sitting, nothing can be done, but working hard will result in good things. So what can you take from this basic idea, right? How can you enact this? We wanted to give you some suggestions. You can create change based upon the findings from our research by simply trying new challenges, by realizing that you have the capacity to take on things that you haven't done before. And the challenge itself, doing it, is what's going to build the confidence. It's not the reverse. Sometimes we think, once I have the confidence, I can start to do these things. But what our research is teaching us is it's the doing that leads to the confidence and affirmation that participants felt. Another thing you might consider is taking on new roles. I think for me, the data has really shown me this, is if you give a person a chance to serve in a new capacity, they take it on. And that role really shapes who they are and, more importantly, who they become. So in the self-help groups, that may be as simple as being the chair of that group or the vice chair or the secretary. But in our own lives, it might mean trying a new leadership role or serving on a board. And if you can just shift what you're choosing to do and get more involved, I think you're going to build your self-efficacy and create transformation. The third one that's very popular in the self-help literature is this idea of setting clear goals. Most of the change we saw, it's not like people go from 0 to 100 and the change is done, is they really build it a long time. And we kept seeing change, as Avinash mentioned, all the way until 30 years past the early beginning of that one group. And that's because people set new goals, new challenges, and it's in the process of setting these new goals that they're able to succeed. And then finally, when you do face obstacles, what we saw in the data is as people build their strength, they realize that obstacles are just a natural part of life, natural parts of projects, natural parts of relationships, and they reframe those obstacles as opportunities in a much more positive light. So for us, part of how you can create change is to change this identity and really focus on this idea of efficacy. I put in a quote here from one of our participants who said, I started thinking on what I can take me forward so that I can add on the riches that I have. That's when Heifer came in and they trained us about development and brought us cornerstones that we have been living on. So we wanted to take a little bit of a moment to explore this idea with you. And so we're going to ask you, I'm going to come out of my Zoom here, and we wanted to build in you a chance to interact with people here. We've got about 30 people. And so we're going to create a breakout room and just an opportunity for you to answer this prompt. I'm going to put it in chat. We'll do like 4 minutes or so. And all we want you to ask is, or answer and share, is what is an example of a time when you, in your own life, overcame something difficult or challenging? And how did that experience change your sense of self? How did it create some degree of transformation into your own life? So take a note of the question. I'll put it back in when you get into the breakout rooms. I'm going to pair you up. And all we want you to do is just share with each other and come back and hopefully have experienced a good conversation with somebody. So I'm going to create 14 breakout rooms. And some of you might have 3. Or hold on, Carrie, I'm going to need to move you. Yeah. And go ahead, have fun, meet each other. And I'll put the prompt again once you get into the room. And we're going to give you 4 or 5 minutes. So you may have to move pretty quickly. Share.
Looks like we're about halfway bringing them back in.
Awesome. When in 30 seconds, they won't be able to, they'll have to come back. So there we are. I can see Livia, Amar, Belinda. Everybody had a chance to interact a little bit. Let me know, April, once everybody's kind of there and we can keep going.
I will be glad to do that. Looks like
I
think it's it. I think,
so.
yeah, there we go.
Avinash and I wanted to put this prompt and this reflection in this little interactive exercise because I think if we analyzed all of our stories, we would find that it was the challenge, it was the decision to do it that ultimately build our capacity and our sense of agency. And for us, in the data that we're seeing that one of the ways to change your identity isn't by trying to build your self-esteem or to feel good, but it's really done by taking on challenges that you didn't think were possible. And then that builds your sense of efficacy and changes really you and begins the transformation process. So we're going to focus now on the second element that we focused on for today, and Avinash is going to take it from here.
Right. So the second element, out of the 7 elements, I think we're just focusing on 4: self-identity, followed by intercultural sensitivity. I think this is something that we want to highlight here and show you some results that our participants witness. So essentially, intercultural sensitivity is one of the hardest one here. It is the ability to welcome and transcend human difference. So for example, in Bihar, India, and like in other sites that we have across Uganda, Honduras, Bihar, Nepal, all these sites and everywhere, even in the United States here, we see lots of differences between us and other people that are out there. So might be in Bihar, for example, there were caste differences, religious differences, language. There's so many languages. So there is gender differences. This is in addition to all the socioeconomic and educational differences that we witness every day in our day-to-day lives. And these women were also, the Heifer participants were also facing with these challenges. Imagine some of these women were really coming from the really lower caste from India, and they had lots of discrimination going on. So the participants, even with all these things going on, what does intercultural sensitivity means? It means to show mutual respect for each other, even though there are some differences, there are some issues that were there, to recognize and actually have these mutual respect, but also go across and then develop an ability to engage in dialogue with the others who are different from us. So it's kind of a place where you need a lot of courage to do these things. Not only engage in dialogue, sometimes you don't want to talk to other people who are different than you. Whether it is, Dr. April, talks about the differences, political differences that are there between here in the United States, between Republicans and Democrats, or whatever other differences that are there. It needs a feeling of empathy towards the other. and also welcoming that difference. So intercultural sensitivity is a very fundamental aspect of transformation and overcoming all these differences to focus and interact and communicate and build relationships across these cultural differences. So we saw in our data, a lot of women were engaging in these challenges. They were taking it headlong, and they were also understanding and appreciating the cultural variance, and then negotiating their cross-cultural dissimilarity. So, for example, Julien, we go to the next slide. Krishnamurti tells you, G2 Krishnamurti is a philosopher from India, and he is really big on developing relationships, recognizing the cultural differences. So he says that the world is you. It is not separate from you. What you are, the world is. There must be a fundamental revolution in our relationship with people and ideas. There must be a fundamental change, and that change must begin not outside you, but in your relationship with others and with yourself. So this quote exemplifies intercultural sensitivity. So what can you do? So I'm going to quickly point out a couple examples from our data where we saw a lot of change in intercultural sensitivity exhibited by women in different parts of the world, different data sets. So in Bihar, where I was talking earlier about lots of cultural differences, a lot of differences were there. So when the interviewer was asking this women, when someone different from you comes to you, how do you act? And this lady, she was about 6 months into Heifer project, and she says that, why should I fear if somebody different than me comes to meet me? Every person is a human being. If she is educated, then I will call her ma'am. If he's a policeman, he's a human being too, but he's in uniform. Everyone respects the uniform. So if one studies and is well educated, he becomes a police officer, a soldier, a judge, or anything that is human being. I will think first, and then I will speak, and I will think about whom this should be, and be told that what are the after effects of interacting with this person. So in this particular quote, I think we see here that there is a lot of understanding and appreciation of difference, the mutual difference that is there, but also the willingness to go across and engage in dialogue with this other person. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's really problematic to kind of take that step. But these women were displaying these kind of intercultural sensitivity attitudes. For example, another example from Uganda, it says that if someone comes to you, the same question was asked to this lady in Uganda. When someone different comes to you, how do you act? And this lady says that if someone comes to you and wants to talk to you, I believe that is a blessing, because we learn from others. We would not have come to learn from you alone. He may come and you also learn from him. So you give him your time to talk to you. Then you also listen to what comes out of his mouth. And then you respond to him with what you know. What you don't know, you tell him that you don't know, because the Bible says that we should never refuse to allow visitors, because you may welcome an angel without even knowing that this is a person is an angel. So if someone comes and you react badly, then you have to have lost the gift from him. This is from this lady in Uganda, which kind of exemplifies the progress that has been taking place in terms of this particular element, intercultural sensitivity. So what can you do based on this data and all these women that we're doing? What can we learn from it? So let's go to the next slide.
This is at Avinash. It's right on.
Oh, this
right
does, yeah, that's. So what can you do next here based on the data? Well, actually, each one of us can understand that we are not different categories that are out there, but we need to challenge these categories, whether it is caste, whether it is religion differences, whether it is interpersonal differences, whether it is socioeconomic differences, you name it. There's so many categories that are out there, and we sometimes get fixed into these categories, and then we don't want to step outside these categories. So one of the things that I learned from these women is that to challenge the categories that are out there, and then take the next step, which is willingness to meet the other at their level, at their viewpoints. The hardest one, I think, once you take the challenge to question the categories, then the willingness part comes next, to meet the other person at their place. And then this has been really interesting to find that these women were really engaging into finding commonalities. What is, after all, we are all humans. So what are the shared commonalities? What is similar between you and me, rather than just zeroing on differences? What is that something that is similar than difference that is out there? So we are more similar than others. This feeling of engaging with others kind of comes in because we can share, we can find out the commonalities between each other. And then obviously the last two ones are to discover and deeply listen to the other person, understand the difference and discover what it means. And then finally, sometimes even after taking all these 4 steps, we still get caught into our differences because, it's right in front of us and we are not able to get out of these differences. So what I have found from these women is that you have to take the next step and get out of the immediate closeness that we have and focusing on differences, and take the cosmic approach, expand our perspective by taking it to the cosmic level. So that helps us to see from the bigger picture. We go out 30,000 feet or go all the way to the cosmic level and see from down there. Our differences doesn't mean anything. We are just magnifying those differences. And one of the stories, I think, fascinating stories that we have from Little Rock is what our former president, Bill Clinton did sometime back in 1997 when he was negotiating a peace deal between Israel and Palestine way back, if some of you might remember. Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister were there in the Oval Office. This is a famous story that I share when I talk about culture and difference. I've done this with Dr. Driscoll and Julien and other people. And this story really exemplifies that we need to sometimes take a cosmic viewpoint to bridge the differences. Because what happened was there was almost a deal that was being fixed to end the Palestine-Israel problem. And Yasser Arafat and the Israeli president was ready to sign the deal, and then they got caught into these differences, pointing to the differences rather than looking at the cosmic level. And Bill Clinton, he intervened and he said that, hey, both of you calm down and look at this moon rock right on my table there. So you can see that moon rock in the middle there in his office, and he's pointing to the moon rock and saying that moon rock is 3.5 billion years old, and it is still there. And in the larger scheme of the things, imagine what you're thinking, what the differences you're pointing out doesn't matter. You go transcend those differences by taking a cosmic view of the problem. And so that's what I think we need to do. Sometimes we have to look at the cosmic level to overcome our differences. This is something that I learned, and I think the women, the story that the data that we have got kind of exemplifies that. So the next element, I think, state of leadership. Julien is going to tell a little bit more about what we found there.
Thanks, Avinash. So we may have to adjust our presentation a little bit and just focus on state of leadership and then so we can conclude and then give you a chance to ask some questions as well. But at least let's tell you a little bit more about the third element. So far what we've said basically is if you want to create change in your own life, you have to create a change in your sense of self, which is through self-efficacy. You have to develop the capacity to meet people who are different from you and to really have the courage to meet difference head on. And the third thing that we're noticing in the data is the men and women that we've been interviewing and surveying move towards what we call the fundamental state of leadership. By definition, defined by Quinn and Quinn, who are two business professors, the fundamental state of leadership is a psychological state in which you uplift yourself and others. I wanted to share a story that's pretty popular, but that you may not be aware. Here's a picture that you may see here in the slides, and you may not recognize these individuals. But if you look, this is a group of women approximately 30 years ago in a small village in Zimbabwe who are meeting with Joe Luck, who is CEO of Heifer International for many years. On the right, she's the white woman that you see in the middle of the group. That's Joe Luck. On her right is a woman named Tererai Trent. Tererai Trent was married very young, probably approximately 12 or 13 or 14 years old. By the time she was 18 years old in this village in Zimbabwe, she had 4 children. And as you can see in the picture, it's hard to imagine how her life could change in any capacity. So Joe Luck is visiting this community mostly to see if Heifer International can be of help. And the way Heifer always works is they go to the community and they just start a conversation with members of the local community. So here she is in this circle meeting with these women. Right next to her is Tererai Trent. And at some point in the conversation, she notices that Tererai Trent has not said a thing. So she turns to her and she says, Tererai Trent, you have not said anything. And then she asked her, she said, what are you dreaming about? What are you hoping for? Tererai, years later, tells the story. You can watch the talk today. It's a TEDx talk that's available. And stands up in front of all the women. She says, I don't know how I got the courage, but I stood up in front of all of my sisters and I said, I want to get a college degree. I want to study in the United States and I want to get a bachelor's degree. I want to get a master's degree and I want to get a PhD. And then she continued the conversation with Joe Luck, who encouraged her that this was possible. So she ran to her mother's home, who told her, if you believe what this woman has told you, write down your dreams on a piece of paper and bury them into the grounds like we do with the umbilical cord after the birth of a child, a common practice in Zimbabwe. And so Tererai Trent wrote her dreams. Her mom reviewed them and her mom said, those are pretty good dreams, but you really need to be adding something about how you can help others, because just meeting your dreams is not going to be enough. So she wrote her dreams, she buried them into the ground, and then she went on a journey. It took her 7 years to earn her GED, class by class, saving money, paying for a class, saving money, paying for a class. And if you look up Tererai Trent today, this is what you would find. Tererai Trent not only finished her GED, but she was accepted at Oklahoma State University, where she earned her bachelor's degree, then later on a master's degree, ultimately earned a PhD, and as you can see here, is a world-renowned author and speaker. She wrote a book called The Awakened Woman, Remembering and Reigniting Our Sacred Dreams. And she has a huge fan on her side, who is here, Oprah Winfrey, who in fact gave her millions of dollars to start schools for girls in Zimbabwe. Now, so many amazing stories that we could talk about with Tererai Trent, but what is really unbelievable is that she made a decision that changed her life forever. She went on a journey. And that journey, according to the research that we're doing, is called using the fundamental state of leadership. And it has 4 characteristics that I'm going to briefly overview. How do people create change in the way that happened to Tererai? The first thing is purpose. If you want to create transformation, often in the data we see that people move from a total lack of purpose to developing a sense of their mission and guide in life. And that's what happened to Tererai. She moved from not knowing what to do to having very clear purpose on what she was going to do. And that ignited the change. So If you don't know what you're doing, find your purpose and your mission and talk to friends because they can help you get there. The second thing that happened that puts you in a state of leadership is you stop worrying about meeting other people's expectations and values. You identify your own values and then you live by them. You integrate them fully into your being. And that gives you a sense of internal direction, which means you're making decisions not because of external factors, but because of the values that you've identified. The third element is what we call becoming other focused. So instead of worrying so much about you, this is what her mom told her, right? You have to have dreams for other people. And those are often the most fulfilling. So get outside of just your goals and figuring out how you can use your energy to make a contribution to others, which will only accelerate your own transformation. And then finally, the fourth element of really what we see in terms of developing the state of leadership is becoming fully open to external events. And in fact, becoming a lifelong learner. One of the questions we asked in the interview is, what do you want to learn about? And when we do that really early on in the process, people often say nothing. I don't know, nothing. I don't have anything that I really want to learn. But when we study people later on through the process, they can tell you exactly what they need to learn. Maybe it's they need to learn how to package things better, or they need to learn how to treat their animals in a more productive way, or they need to learn a second language so they can interact with people who are different from them. They become more and more and more and more open to learning. So, state of leadership is our third element. And so now, sorry that we're going to miss civic and community engagement, but we're going to try just to conclude so we can really answer your questions. What we're trying to show you is that just as the women in our lives, men and women in the Heifer projects are able to create transformation in their own lives, that you can do that too, simply by drawing upon these 7 elements that we've conceptualized in our model. We focus on 3 today. For us, these are maybe points of ignition, points of start for thinking and for action. So make a change in your identity. Change the way that you look at others. Don't see other people as enemies, but as collaborators, and engage with others with a sentiment of trust. Develop your communication skills by joining the Applied Communication Department, and either as an undergraduate student or a graduate student. Try to engage in the state of leadership that we've just described and become your own terrorite. Be empowered, seek to educate yourself, develop some savings so you can develop some economic empowerment. Develop your ability to interact with people who are different from you. And I wish we would have had more time, but we do teach a class, and Dr. April Chatham Carpenter does, particularly really helping people becoming more civically and community engaged. And we see that all across our data. So we hope you can too. This is one of my favorite quotes that we collected. This is from Girja. And this just tells you where they are in terms of their connection with other people. She's talking about the group. And this is what she said to us. She says, if we try to break a wooden stick, it will break easily. If we try to break 2 sticks, it will need more efforts than earlier. If we try to break 3 sticks altogether, it won't be as easy as earlier. But then if we try to break 10 sticks altogether, we will not be able to break them at all until and unless we separate them. This is how a team works. If a team is united, no one can break it. And while we spent most of the hour here telling you about how you can create your own transformation, part of the message that we're getting from this research in Honduras, Uganda, and India and Nepal is that none of it is worth all of it by yourself. You've got to unite with other people and achieve something much bigger than who you are with other people. So we hope that this tells you a little bit about our research project, and we look forward to hearing your questions and engaging with you.
All right. This is the opportunity to ask some questions. This has been really, I know for me, very inspirational in thinking about my own experiences. So I do see a couple of questions that have come into the chat, one up above. And Bailey, if you want to read those questions out as we go through, and then be thinking about your own question. You can either put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand.
So is the first question, I want to make sure that I'm going
From
back to
Dr.
the first.
Morrow, I think.
Yes. So Avinash, great presentation. Thank you. Chasing a cosmic view is leadership, but not justice, question mark. So posing that as a question.
Excellent. I think Dr. Moro is raising a very fundamental point here. And I want to refer back to the story. Actually, it's not a story, it's a historical fact where going back to what Bill Clinton was trying to do. It is tough. I mean, justice, you feel that, especially with these complex problems, when you feel that you are being encroached upon, as a community, or just as an individual, as in the case of Israel and Palestine, I think both the communities are feeling that, hey, what is the justice here? I don't want to give up my land or my rights, or whatever you have there. But I think if you hold on to just not seeing the points where there is commonalities and just focus on these differences and pinpoint the justice part, there is definitely some commonalities out there in every complex problem, every situation. I guess there is, if we look close enough, I think there are some. And if you cannot have complete justice, I agree, Dr. Moro, but still, if Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister at that point of time would have seen those commonalities, what we are seeing today would not have been even possible. So I don't know the answer to your question to how do you take care of the justice as well as transcend that cultural differences that we have. But that is one of the ways. That's what I think women in Heifer are trying to do at their individual level. So when they meet a person from a higher caste, they know that they've been discriminated. There's been injustice that was going on, but still they take this step and try to have a dialogue, try to not see the differences, but see the commonalities. That would be one of the ways. I hope
I do want to share a story here, Avinash, because we do have some stories of women, again, in the progression, who come to this place where they do, we have stories of justice in the data. The one that comes to mind here is, a woman who is in really an abusive relationship with her husband. And partially because the husband is drinking. And so what happens is she goes and tells her sister. So now she has a self-help group to confide in, which did not exist years before, right? Now she has a social support system. So she shares that with the group members. And what happens next is the 20 women who hear the story go to the house where the husband is, and they talk to him. And although, you might think, well, what's going on there? That is justice. Right? In some way, it is both leadership and justice. But the way that they're engaging about doing it, to me, is also very positive, because they're seeking conversation and they're seeking to talk to him. And the way the story was told is like, they basically told him that he was hurting her. And they asked him, is this the kind of husband that you want to be? And that led to some change in him. So I don't know that I have the answer either, but I think that would be one way it makes me think about this. Yeah. I see a question from Eric. Can I take this one?
Absolutely. That's what I was hoping you would.
So Eric asks, about how we measure these concepts, and that's a really great question. So again, we have two tools. So we have the qualitative instrument, and then we have the quantitative instrument. So in the qualitative, we took these concepts that you just heard us talk through, and we developed questions to really probe into them. And because we really reviewed the literature to arrive at these 7 elements, not knowing at the time whether or not we were heading home, by the way. In the survey research, it's a little different. For some of the elements, we have existing scales. So for instance, in identity, we used a scale that had previously been tested on self-esteem. We have 100 questions. And we used a scale on self-efficacy. So that's also how we were able to measure, first, whether or not the scale had significance, but also we're able to know, the difference between these two. That's how we were able to know that. In communication, we had the interpersonal communication competence scale that was developed by Rubin and Martin. But then sometimes we developed our own questions. So in the case of communication, we used my model of positive communication, and we developed 7 questions to see if the questions would kind of get significance. And in the data that we've collected, they do, in fact, and we've been able to use those questions. So it really depends. Some were more inductive. Like for state of leadership, we use some questions from Quinn and Quinn's work, but then when we measured state of leadership, we also attended to the cornerstones. And so we had to develop a lot of questions aligned with Heifer's values, which include things like sharing and caring and empowerment and animal management, because that was another way that we would measure that. So I hope that it's more complex than everything that I've just said, but I hope that that gives you a picture at least.
All right, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. You can raise your virtual hand, or you can write your questions in the chat. Julien, I actually had a question, and I wanted to know if the 7 elements that you all have found, if actually those are in any order. So, I mean, is there like an order in which they are grown inside of us, or that we need to be focusing on them?
So we did not, and Avinash may want to add something here, but we do not have an order for them. So the diagram is a little bit, we do start with identity because that is important. What I will tell you now is that there, in terms of transformation based upon the data itself, that there are some elements that transcend all 3 sites. There are some that are more dominant in certain, like in India, there's some that are more dominant. In Uganda that are more, like for example, intercultural sensitivity was actually really dominant in Uganda, versus civic and community engagement, which is really salient in Honduras. But across the board, there's 4 of them that really come to the top. Identity, communication skills, not just because I'm a communication professor, but I am telling you, when you build your communication skills, it has a big impact on your ability to transform yourself and the relationships that you have with others. And then civic and community engagement and state of leadership. So those are the top 4 that we see. And partially because we have a limited time frame. So most of our data is collected from 0 to 3 years, with the exception of Uganda, where we collected 0 to 5 to 6 years. And where we might see really big change in intercultural sensitivity, for example, is going to really take place much longer. You have to remember that change is not, the way people think about it is like, I go from 0 to 100 and I'm changed. Our data shows that we call it a gradual awakening. It's just the small little baby steps that suddenly create that transformation, and it makes you stronger and stronger and stronger, but it's time invested and it's challenges faced.
Right. I guess interesting to see at the end of all our data collection and analysis that we're going to do, how this all pans out. But at the moment, as Julien was saying, we don't have enough empirical evidence to kind of have a order of which element is first or which element is second. But we do have, at this point, and we have to do a lot of further analysis also, but 4 elements that really stand out: communication leadership, identity, state of leadership, and civic and community engagement. And we're going to unpack this a little bit more and maybe have some more insights into this.
All right. Well, last question. I think it's a good one. All of these have been good, but Rosa Bost asked, are you going back there to continue your research or extend it in some way to any of those places?
So we are, we're kind of actually coming to the end a little bit, because by now we're doing one last project. We're returning to Bihar, where we have been able to do longitudinal research, which, unlike what we've done before, where we really did group comparisons, now we actually have been tracking since 2019, where we started in India, actually in 2020, where we started in India. We took a subsample of that population, and we've been tracking the same individuals over time, which is a lot harder to do just mythologically. So we did an initial study with them. A year and a half later, we did follow up, and then now we're reaching the 3-year mark. And so in November, there will be more data collected, and that's going to help us to finalize the actual measurement tool that Heifer will use to track its progress on projects that they're doing across the world.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. In the chat, I am also putting some information about the next leadership lecture that we'll have, which is in February. And the way to sign up for that is to actually go to ualr.at/leader lectures. That actually also would link you out to our website if you kind of follow the links backwards, which is ualr.edu/applied.com. And you can, Julien has put his email address as well as Avinash's in the chat. So if you want to contact them for more information. But, you know, the Department of Applied Communication and the research that we do, this is a great illustration of that, because it goes into the community, actually determines what is the communication and the kinds of relationships that are being built in a community, and how can they be improved, and how can they actually, we take and learn from those to actually make our own relationships and communities better. So thank you, Julien and Avinash, for your leadership in this area. And I would love to get a picture of all of us at the end. Just and is there anybody here that's really good at taking screenshot pictures? Shalonda, Michelle, somebody? Susie Reese, I'm just thinking, can you guys, if you would not mind having your cameras on? If you don't want to be in the picture, then you don't have to have your camera on. But if you would like to be in the picture, then turn your camera on. So I'll give everybody a chance to do that if they want to. All right. So how about Shalana, Michelle, you're getting a screenshot of this? Awesome. And you'll send that to me. Thank you so much. Let's get this picture taken. Everybody look like they've had a good time. Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Got it?
Got it.
Awesome. Well,
Thank you
very
so
good.
much, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you for joining us,
All right,
everybody.
have a great evening. Living out the mission of co-creating better social worlds through positive communication. That's what we do. You can do it too, all of us. Thank you, Julien and Avinash. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Gotta
Good
go,
night.
guys. Mhm.